organizer, wait, that's not my title, community engagement coordinator for the Great Falls Public Library. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. This is a tremendous amount of people in here, and I am so excited. Are y'all excited? Yeah, all right. So we, as the Great Falls Public Library, are here to serve as a connection point to empower the community and enhance the quality of life by providing individuals access to information and social, cultural, and recreational resources. Just a few housekeeping things before we truly get started tonight. If you don't know, the bathrooms are in the hallway. Now you know. There's also a water fountain in there, in the hallway, and the emergency exit is around the corner, so out the doors to the right and around the corner. I know some of y'all came down that way. Some of y'all came down the elevator. At the end of today's program, please feel free to take the stairs unless you want to wait approximately 12 eons to take the elevator. Your choice, I guess. The stairs are open for you guys to use as an exit point as well. So tonight we have John Kunz. John is a retired Great Falls realtor and has lived in Montana since 1949. However, his story starts in 1944 in Germany in a concentration camp. He and his family survived, and after the war made their journey to America. Tonight, we will learn about this journey, about the Holocaust, and we will remember this history together. And with that, everybody, please welcome John.
Good evening. In Polish, WWII. I thank you all for coming tonight. It thrills me to see all of you here, and knowing almost 90% of you here. So, thank you also to Dr. Susan Wolf for instigating this, Susie McIntyre, and Sarah Colley of the library. I would also like to, a special thanks to Mickey Thomas, who has encouraged me from the very beginning to share my story. It's very appropriate that I'm sharing my story with you here. In first and second grade, I was still not speaking much English. One of my teachers at St. Mary's found that I liked animals and got me a book about a horse. I had to read that book. Once I read the book, I could speak English. After that, I spent a lot of time here at this library. My other greeting to you is Dzień dobry, which is good day. And that has special meaning for me every single day. To start the story, what is the Holocaust? There was some misconceptions about what the Holocaust is. The Holocaust was Nazi Germany's vision, led by Adolf Hitler, to dominate Europe and the world by eliminating certain people, mainly Jews, Poles, other Slavs, and Gypsies, and then populate the Polish land with ethnic Germans. There was a misconception that the Holocaust was just killing Jews. This was a proclamation that Hitler issued a month before he invaded Poland, and I'll read this. I have issued the command, and I'll have anybody who utters but one word of criticism executed by a firing squad, that our war aim does not consist in reaching certain lines, but in the physical destruction of the enemy. Accordingly, I have placed my death head formations in readiness, for the present only in the east, with orders to them, to send to death mercilessly, without compassion, men, women, and children of Polish derivation and language. Only thus shall we gain the living space, Lebensraum, that we need. And that was his proclamation a month before he ever invaded Poland. The toll in Poland was 6 million, and the ratio of Jews to Gentiles was 1 to 1. The Nazis established extermination camps and crematories in Poland and Germany to kill these undesirables and dispose of the remains. Some of those camps were Auschwitz, Dachau, Belzec, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, just to name a few. Here's my German birth certificate. It was issued, I was born in 1944. I didn't get a birth certificate until after the liberation by the U.S. Army. So this was issued in 1946 in Bayreuth. This map of Poland and Germany, and this is when the Germans invaded Poland. They came in from the west. At the same time, the Soviets attacked from the east. And you see where the two lines meet at the bottom, and the town is called Lvov, L-V-O-V. Well, that's where my parents were. And at that time, it was Poland. Today, that's in the Ukraine. You know, those cultures kind of crossed over back and forth. But that's how the Soviet Union and the Germans invaded from the west and the Soviet from the east. So in addition to all the people that they killed, the Nazis also enslaved 12 million people from 20 different countries for slave labor in Germany. 2/3 were from Eastern Europe, 21% were from Poland. During World War II, the Nazis operated several categories of labor camps for different purposes, different categories of inmates. Prisoners in Nazi labor camps were worked to death on short rations and bad conditions, or killed if they became unable to work. Many died as a direct result of this forced labor under the Nazis. There were a total of about 800, and this is amazing because we always think of Bergen-Belsen and Dachau and Auschwitz. All those little red dots that you see on the map, that was all concentration camps. There was 800. You know, and that isn't, you know, it's amazing, but that isn't taught in our history classes here in the United States. You know, and the fact that in Poland the ratio of Jews to Gentiles was 1 to 1, that was always a misconception, you know, of what the Holocaust really was all about. So 800 camps for free labor in Germany. So this is my story, and it's a story of survival and gratitude. I've been very fortunate in my life, starting with being born in that concentration camp in 1944. And that's kind of an odd thing to say, isn't it? But yeah. I survived against all odds by the grace of God. And here I am. And if I hadn't been born there, I wouldn't be here with you. At the very beginning, my parents were both born in southeastern Poland near the city of Lvov. My father came from a tiny village where his father was a forester for a large estate. My mother also from the same area. In 1906 is when my dad was born. And that area was overrun by the Bolsheviks and the Germans, World War I. So the family hid out in the forest during World War I. My grandmother, my dad's mother, was wounded by shrapnel. They don't know if it was the Russian shrapnel or German shrapnel, but she was wounded then and survived. And then the war ended, and then it was 20 years of peace in Poland between 1919 and 1939. There was peace. World War II, the Germans invaded Poland from the west, September 1, 1939, and the Russians invaded from the east, September 17th, 1939. Prior to the invasion, Hitler and Stalin had signed a non-aggression pact. They both lied. Because they met on this previous map that I showed you. They met right there, coming in from the east and the west both. So this was the different types of camps that the Nazi Germany had. The extermination camps, killing site, euthanasia center, concentration camp, slave labor camp, and a transit camp for criminals. And that was the different types of camps that they had. And again, the map shows where all the concentration camps were, and just to identify the fact that there was 800 camps, and they imprisoned anywhere from 12 to 20 million people during those years, from all countries, mostly from the East. At the beginning of World War II, my parents had a small subsistence farm near Tomaszów Lubelski. My father's main occupation was carpentry, building homes, horse-drawn wagons, and sleighs. The area was where some of the biggest battles between the Russian and the German armies occurred. They clashed right there. And also where later the Nazis had a death camp at the town of Belst. And it's a well-known camp. My mother always talked of knowing of its existence, and she said that she still remembered the smell of those burning bodies all of her life. And here's a coincidence. Right now, today, my cousin, Thomas Haneko, is the director of a Holocaust museum at the town of Belst, where that extermination camp was. So his museum is right on the site of that extermination camp. So in 1941, my father was conscripted by the occupying Nazis to forced labor and left the family behind on their little farm. Several weeks later, he escaped and made his way back to the family. However, the Nazis caught up to him, arrested him, so he was imprisoned, and then he was beaten. And they beat him with rubber hoses. They didn't want to break any bones because they still needed labor, but they beat him with rubber hoses. My mother went to see him to try to petition his release, said that he was beaten so badly she didn't even recognize him. She did barter his release with whatever they had at the farm, milk, butter, eggs, and for a short time the family was reunited. Then in 1942, my family was taken from their farm by the German Nazis and watched the Germans slaughter their livestock and burn the farm, because the Germans didn't want to leave any spoils for the Russians that were coming through. So they wanted to eliminate everything, and they burned the farm and killed the livestock. My parents and others and my older siblings, along with thousands of Poles, were shipped out of Poland to southern Germany by train in cattle cars to a Nazi slave labor camp. My family was sent to a camp named Ramsenthal near Bayreuth. This camp consisted of bare wooden barracks behind barbed wire fence. There's an old photo of what the barracks in a concentration camp looked like, in a slave labor camp. My father and my older brothers were sent out on work details from the camp as needed, sometimes as farm labor, sometimes construction, or even mining. My brothers were 12 and 13 years old at the time, but according to the Germans, the Nazis, they were considered adults for labor, so at 12 and 13. My mother also worked. She was sewing clothing for the Nazis. Food was limited to dry bread, and at best, a thin broth, usually of broccoli or turnips. For the rest of his life, my father hated broccoli and turnips. I was born in barracks in that camp in 1944. There were no doctors. My older sister, Amelia, aged 10, assisted at my birth, as she reminded me all of her life. I was not expected to survive. My sister cared for me after, while my mother went back to work. And because of lack of sufficient nutrition, my mother was not able to nurse me. They found another lady in the barracks that could nurse me, and I survived. The war ended in 1945, and the camp was deserted by the Nazis as the U.S. Army advanced. We were free, but we were set adrift with no means of survival, along with several million other former prisoners of the Germans. From 1939 to 1945, the Nazis had abducted approximately 12 to 20 million people from all over Europe for slave labor and extermination. 21% were Polish. 6 million Poles were killed or died of starvation during this war. In 1945, the U.S. Army and the United Nations and Rehabilitation Administration, along with the Red Cross, established refugee camps in order to assist and sort out millions of people from all over Europe left stranded in Germany. And this is a picture of the wooden bunks in the barracks, and it's a generic photo taken of those bunks. But I did go to Auschwitz 4 years ago, and I visited the camp, and that's exactly what those bunks look like, and that's where I was born, in one of those wooden bunks that you see right there. And again, by the grace of God, I survived. The Nazis were very efficient in the fact that all of their slave labor camps and their concentration camps, they must have used the same architect. They all looked the same. The barracks and the layout and the bunks, and they were all very identical, very well done. So there's a picture of my mother and holding me on the chair, and my two sisters, one on each side, Stella and Helen. And this was taken after the liberation by the U.S. Army, and at this point we had clothes and we had food. But we were still in that same camp because they hadn't set up the refugee camps yet. So this was still our home, was in that slave labor camp. And this picture, we didn't have cameras or anything, so this picture was done by the U.S. Army. They were documenting everything. And so we have a few little pictures that we got after the war, after the liberation from the U.S. Army. But I'm just so lucky I have that photo. I'm the only one left of the family at this point. We ended up in a refugee camp in Hamburg, Germany, after the UN and U.S. Army were able to set up refugee camps, so I spent, I think, 4 years in a refugee camp in Hamburg, Germany. We lived in that camp until July of 1949. And this camp, I do remember. We all lived in one small room, but we had food and adequate clothing. Part of this camp was set aside for the gypsies, and this was my favorite place to be. They somehow still had horse-drawn wagons, and they always had a good music and a good campfire. Another memory I have at this time is that we were befriended by an American soldier who visited us regularly in our little cubicle. And the only words in English that I knew when I came to the United States was the chorus to the song, "You Are My Sunshine." He taught me the song, which I memorized phonetically, but I didn't know the meaning of until after I started school and learned English. I finally knew what the words meant, but I had memorized that song. At the end of the war, once we were documented, vetted, we were given the choice of being shipped back to Poland or apply for a sponsorship to one of the free countries, the United States, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Australia. My dad insisted on the United States. My mother wanted to go back to Poland. Luckily, my dad won. So when the war ended, under the Yalta Agreement between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, Poland was now a communist country. My father said that he had had enough from the Bolsheviks, the Nazis, and the communists. Luckily, my father won that battle and with my mother, but it was a long wait. In the meantime, tired of waiting, my oldest brother, Thomas, he had turned 18 by now, and he wanted to get on with his life, and he says, "I'm tired of waiting, sitting here in a refugee camp in Germany." So he left. He signed up with a recruiter from Great Britain. There was all kinds of labor recruiters from all over, and he had signed a contract to go to Great Britain to work at a coal mine just to get out of Germany. He was tired of sitting. Sponsors for relocation for all these refugees were solicited from different relief organizations, such as the UN Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, commonly called UNRWA, the Red Cross, and various church groups. Sponsors were responsible for refugees' costs of transportation from Germany to the chosen destination country, and also assisting in finding a home and employment. At the end of 1949, we finally got a sponsor to the United States and came by ship to New York, processed at Ellis Island, and then they put us on a train. We didn't have a clue where we were going. They just, here you go, get on this train, you're gone. 4 or 5 days later, where did we end up? Butte, Montana. My mother got off the train in Butte, and in 1949, it was pretty bleak in Butte. She started crying. She said, "Oh my God, where did they take us?" But luckily, we are here. We and about 20 other Polish families were sponsored to the United States by St. John the Evangelist Church Catholic Church in Fairfield, Montana, and Catholic Relief Services, of course. So in those years between 1948 and 1951, and Father Russell Scheidler, never forget his name, Russell Scheidler, he was the priest that adopted all of us and helped us get settled with jobs and homes. Most of these families were scattered around central Montana, wherever they could find work. Some worked at Anaconda Smelter in Great Falls. Some worked for the Great Northern Railroad in Cutbank and Shelby, and also Great Falls. And others worked on some small farms. And I'll read you the names of just the families that I can remember, and that's, because I don't have any documentation, but the family names are Alekshinsky, Brzezinski, Grabowski, Jędrzejewski, Kryskowiak, and now that's a name that we should all remember, because Larry Kryskowiak played for University of Montana basketball, and then went on to play pro, and then he was coaching. Well, his father, Bernard, just passed away here in Great Falls, and that was in April of this year. And he had worked for the railroad for Burlington Northern forever, retired from there as station master here in Great Falls. The other names are Kubis, Kunz, Mierzwinski, Olejnik, Pikars, Poplavski, Riles, Jelchik, Świeciński, Voloshin, Zazula. And these are only the names that I remembered. So our family lived in the basement of the church in Fairfield for almost a year. The rest of the refugees, as they came, the families came, the Father Russell Scheider had already found them a home and a job. So they would process through, and we lived in little, in the basement of the church, they had blanket partitions, you know, between the cots, and that was where they, but they, most of those families would come in and they would spend 3 or 4 days at the church and then go on to their future home. But we stayed there almost a year, because the priest found out my mother was a good cook, so he asked her to stay and be the camp cook for all the rotation of the refugees as they came. And so we ended up living in the basement of that church for almost a year. Finally came to Great Falls. Shortly after we arrived in Fairfield, I was rushed to the Columbus Hospital in Great Falls in a coma from malnutrition caused by infection and parasites. I was in the hospital for about a week, scared to death, because when I awoke, because I couldn't speak English, and there wasn't anybody there that could tell me what was going on, but I survived. You can tell. I've overcome the malnutrition. We moved to Great Falls where my father worked as a carpenter, also spent 20 years until he retired as custodian at Central Catholic High School. My youngest sister, Anne Marie, was born here in this country in 1950. She was the first U.S. citizen in our family. Upon getting settled, my parents were able to get my brother Thomas to join us here in Montana. He went to work for the Great Northern Railroad, but was only there about 6 months before getting drafted into the U.S. Army and shipped to Korea. So he went out from one war right into another one. But we lived on the lower north side of Great Falls near St. Anne's Cathedral, where I attended St. Mary's School. And from the age 8, I was selling the evening news, the Great Falls Leader, on the corner of 1st Avenue South and 3rd Street. This is right across from, you know, right now it's Bert and Ernie's, but at that time it was the Golden Gate Grocery. And it was a pretty lively section of Skid Row in those days. I learned a lot of colorful English there. And that was really the beginning of my career in sales, right there, 80 years old. Leader, get your leader. Then I worked all through high school. I worked at Durkin Oil Company, pumping gas and doing auto repair. Graduated from Central Catholic High in '62. I enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. After my discharge as a sergeant, I moved to Newark, New Jersey, where my 2 older brothers had settled. And I worked part-time tending bar at my brother's bar was called Casey's. Can you imagine that? A Polish bar by the name of Casey's. Everybody thought it was an Irish bar. Now his real name was Casimir, so we called him Casey. So people would wander in the door thinking it was an Irish bar. No, it was polkas on the jukebox. So I worked part-time tending bar at my brother's bar. I also worked at American Home Products, packaging research, and attended Rutgers University at night. I returned to Great Falls in 1972 worked in auto sales and management for many years, and then I began a career in real estate at Coldwell Banker Cogswell, and then finally ended up buying the company, and I located my office in exact location on Machinery Row where I had worked all through high school at Durkin Oil Company. My office was exactly in that same footprint. I had gone full circle. Both of my parents lived a long, full life in Great Falls after surviving the nightmare of World War II and the Nazi concentration camp. My two older brothers and one sister died young from the effects of the war. I'm the only one in the family left. In my heart, this will always be my home. The many friends, relationships, all of you, the opportunities that I acquired over the years are priceless. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not thankful for my life, my family, St. John's Parish in Fairfield, Father Russell Scheidler, my friends, and my opportunities in the U.S. and Great Falls, Montana. I'm fortunate and grateful. Thank you. And the sister that assisted at my birth in that same labor camp. And that was again after the liberations. They had clothing already furnished by the Red Cross. And this was a family of cousins that disappeared after the war. Oh, this is my very favorite photo of all that I wanted to share with you. And that's it. May Day celebration in the refugee camp in Hamburg, Germany. I'm the little guy in the front there with the striped sweater. See the expression on the little girl's face? I wasn't impressing her at all. And that's my father. This photo was taken for our, probably for passports and visas coming to the United States. My two sisters. And this was Christmas in our cubicle in our refugee camp in Hamburg, Germany. So this was our room was about 8 feet wide. And it was just a row of cots along one wall with, hey, we were safe, we had food, and we had clothing. This uncle, we think, died in Dachau. There was a priest here in Great Falls that was a survivor of Dachau. He actually served, he was one of the first Catholic priests imprisoned in Poland in 1939, right after the invasion by the Germans. And he survived 6 years in Dachau, which was unheard of. And that was father and became Monsignor Gluszek at Holy Family Parish on the east end of town. And Monsignor Gluszek became very good friends with my parents and our family, but he was an amazing person, and he had survived 6 years at Dachau, you know, because Dachau was usually a short trip. But anyway, he was. So, oh, I have a list of books I wanted to share with you. The list of books, The Forgotten Holocaust by Richard Lucas. There is a historical novel called The Volunteer by Jack Fairweather. A very well done book. And The Story of a Secret State, which was written by Jan Karski. Jan Karski had worked for the Polish underground during World War II, and he was captured by the Nazis twice and escaped twice. And his whole purpose, working for the underground, was to try to get the information about the atrocities of the Nazis to the free world. And so he made it on foot from Poland over the Alps, in through France, got to Great Britain to share his information with Churchill, and then also made a trip to the United States and met with Roosevelt, and brought all that information about what was happening with the extermination camps and what the Nazis were doing. But they ignored him until finally later. And then, but he tried to get that information. Anyway, Jan Karski, amazing guy. Oh, and then Jan Karski, when the war ended, he made it to the United States, and he taught at Georgetown University for 40 years. And his students, some of his students were Bill Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, and a couple other well-known names, but that I don't remember at the moment. But Jan Karski, that's an amazing book. It's the story of a secret state, and he wrote that right after World War II. And another one is Of Blood and Hope by Samuel Pisar, and he was a Polish Jew that survived the concentration camps. He had also been at Auschwitz and survived that, and went on to become a professor of international law, and was an advisor to the Kennedy administration at one point. Samuel Pisar. And a new book by Mark Sullivan just came out, and it's a historical fiction that tells a similar and parallel story of a family of German settlers who had been living in the Ukraine, and they're trying to escape the war also. This family also ended up in Montana and started a very successful construction company in Bozeman, Montana. It's the Martell family. And so this book it's a historical fiction, but it's very well done. And so the name of that book is The Last Green Valley. So if you have an interest and want to really get into it, that's it. The story about the Martells is interesting, and it kind of ties into my story in the fact that in Poland, at that time it was Poland, it was also Ukraine. Those borders were very flexible over the years, and they moved back and forth. Back in the 1700s, late 1700s, Catherine the Great of Russia had set up a similar program to our Homestead Act in the United States, but she wanted German colonists to move into South Russia. Catherine the Great was not Russian. Catherine the Great was German, but she had married into the Romanovs. And anyway, so Catherine the Great set up the Homestead Act for the German colonists. So that whole area of the Ukraine, where my parents were from, all the way down to Odessa, that was populated by German colonists from about the 1750s on. And then there was another group on the Volga River, another area of German colonists there, and a third area was in the Crimea. And that was all German colonies, and they were allowed to live in Russia and set up their own villages, their own schools, their own churches, and they were not subject to the draft, to the military draft. And they also were given a stipend of not only a land grant, but also some monetary stipends to get them started and to become successful farmers in the Ukraine and South Russia. So this family of Martells, they were German colonists, and they were trying to escape the war also. But it was quite a journey. So, any questions? Laura?
John, did the Martell family tell you how the mother had crossed a mountain with her children in a wagon?
Yeah, that book, the Last Green Valley, it goes into a lot of detail and tells that whole story, absolutely. You bet.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes?
Hi, my son just go out in Germany and he went all over the place. And he tell me about the picture of what happened with the concentration camp and his son. It's amazing. He was really out there. It's really hard. My mom told me and she understands.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Everybody so much for coming out tonight. I truly appreciate it. I hope that we all learned a little bit of something tonight. And also we learned that, we need to be thankful for what we have, right? There's a lot that is happening in the world, so let's be thankful for what we have. And if you want to take that thought of what you are grateful for, we do have a gratitude chain upstairs that I encourage you guys to write down your thoughts and add your thoughts to the chain of the community. We are just grateful to live here. Thank you so much, John, for coming out tonight. That was an incredible time. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening. So I will get
now I'm paranoid. I'm gonna
I'll put it out on Facebook and so everybody knows we'll put it out. Put that on our Facebook and our website.